This show is brought to you in part by viewers like you who joined a Patreon or become YouTube members. Thank you. And if you could, hit the like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
Yo, what's up? And welcome to QnA, the show where I take your questions and answer them here in video format. Y'all had a lot of questions. First one comes from Ant-Man, and Ant says, let videos cue. My question is simply, am I the only one who thinks the roster is not as bad as people say it is? If just half the rookie class makes an impact, because at least that many will get playing time, I think we can make a run at 8 to 9 wins with middle of the pack quarterback play. What do you think? If the Browns get middle of the pack quarterback play, we're talking about 15, 18 in the league, right? If we're just being like true about what's in the middle, that would be such a ridiculous upgrade from what we had last year that yes, 8 or 9 games would be on the table if that happened. Now, the truth is probably not going to get middle of the pack quarterback play. I think we kind of just say middle of the pack quarterback play, but what we really mean is like, you know, mediocre quarterback play, right? Not average, but slightly worse than average, right? Because average quarterback play, I mean, that's Tua. That's expensive, right? That's what Kirk Cousins was for most of his career, was average. So middle of the pack, I would associate that with average. I don't think they're going to get middle of the pack. If they do, they'll be a pretty good team. But if they get mediocre quarterback play, which is like what the high end of Jameis Winston was mediocre, right? And I know people use mediocre as a synonym for awful a lot, but that's not what mediocre means. Mediocre just means slightly worse than average, right? It's mediocre. It's not awful. It's not abysmal. It's not great. It's mediocre. Could be a lot better. And I think that's where the Browns quarterback room probably going to sit. So, yeah, it will be that. And I think if they get that, then the 8 or 9 games is definitely in play still, even with mediocre quarterback play. Here's the one thing with the Browns roster this year that I'm noticing when I go through it. How you feel about this team has a lot to do about how you feel about the young talent on this team. If you are a believer in Mike Hall, if you love the Mason Graham pick, if you love the Carson Schlesinger pick, if you're a big fan of Quincy Jenkins and Dylan Sampson, like if you're a big fan of the young players on this Cleveland Browns team and you believe in their ability to take those steps, Cedric Tillman included, one of those young quarterbacks get you mediocre or maybe even average quarterback play, then you're going to be more bullish on this Browns team than most. Because that's kind of where it is. What the Browns have right now, it's not a bad roster, right? They got some stalwart players like David Njoku, Denzel Ward, Myles Garrett. So, they have a core there of veteran players. It's not an overwhelming core of veteran players where you're like, this team has to be good. Look at all the proven talent they have. But it's enough proven talent to where it can swing either way. It's really going to be determined on where the youth is with this team. Is the youth in a position to step up and make steps and progress? If that's the case, then the Browns will be much better than people expect. If the youth is not ready, then the Browns are going to have to do more digging to kind of rebuild this team because the foundation is not set. That's going to be what determines for this team. And that's why I think opinions vary so widely with Browns fans, or why Browns fans can at one hand say, hey, I'm pretty optimistic with this team, but on the other hand say, I don't know if we're going to go over 500, which is where I've been at, right? I'm pretty optimistic about the team. I don't know if we're going to go over 500 because we're really relying on a lot of youth. And when you're relying on that much youth, especially when they haven't proven anything, then I get a little wary about just predicting great things, right? Because now I'm just going off vibes. Yeah, I get where you're at. It's kind of where I'm at. Like, I don't think the Browns roster is in as bad as a position as most people think. I don't know if the Browns roster is what I want it to be because I'm betting a lot on some guys who played 200 snaps right last year, or who are going to have their snaps expanded, like Isaiah McGuire or Mike Hall. You know what I mean? Some rookies are sprinkled in there. Ronnie Hickman is going to be the starting safety. How's that going to work out? I think it'll be fine, but I'm not sure, right? Harold Fainin in his role, Quincy Jenkins as a starting running back. Like, how's that going to go? What's going to happen with quarterback? I'm pretty sure it's going to be better than last year, but how much better are we going to be than last year, right? Because just an improvement alone is not really enough because the room was terrible last year. It was awful. It was one of the worst in the NFL. It was 46 out of 32. 47, my bad, out of 32. So yeah, man, I think that's the appropriate place to be at. If you have optimism for this team, then you're going to think that this team can get much closer to 8 or 9 wins because you believe in the young talent. If you're somebody who's not very high on Andrew Berry, you don't really believe in his ability to draft, and there's reason to believe that, then you're probably going to want to, you're probably going to think this team's going to win like 6, 7 games, maybe even 5 games, right? Because you're not betting on that young talent to make those steps. It's really how you feel about that young talent. It's going to shape how you feel about this roster overall because they're at a place to where it could tip either way because they do have a lot of established guys on this team as well, right? Luke says, do you think the Browns add another tight end or just roll with Njoku, Fannin, and maybe Whiteheart? Yeah, I think it's more likely they do that. Maybe they add a 4th tight end. Maybe like Sal Cannella makes the practice squad and they can move him in if they have an injury to one of the receiving tight ends because that's what Sal Cannella really is in the UFL. So I think maybe they're going to go that route, but they're probably just keeping the 3 tight ends, I think, because they're going to want to get Fannin on the field. They're going to want to get Whiteheart on the field. I think they're going to run with the 3 tight ends, maybe a 4th guy on the practice squad. Big Griff says this. Love the vids. Appreciate that. Having a hard time understanding the Tevin Jenkins signing. Me too. For the Browns, this is a fantastic signing, being able to land probably the best guard in free agency. I'm just not sure why Tevin would sign here without a clear path to starting when he's easily could have been somewhere else more guard needy. I would say this. Maybe teams looked at his injury information and got a little bit more scared than they were expecting. I think that is the only explanation that makes sense for Tevin, is that the injury stuff a bit more concerning than we know. And look, this guy had like back problems, right? So maybe there's something there that isn't disclosed publicly that, made teams kind of get a little bit scared of taking him, right? I always try to shy away when it feels like you get an amazing deal in the draft or free agency, right? When you sign a free agent who you thought would be more expensive for low money, when you draft a player who you thought would be in 1 round, ended up in a much later round, I always try to make sure my assumption isn't that everybody else is stupid and that's why we got this good deal. Because oftentimes there's a reason you're getting a good deal. Now, it might be a reason you're willing to deal with and live with, but there's a reason. Like, for example, if you go shopping at TJ Maxx and you get 50% off a Columbia t-shirt, you going to have to figure out why is it I'm getting a discount? And then you look at the shirt, you figure out why you get the discount. You can make the decision on whether it is that you want the 50% off or do you want to just pay more for the regular, right? But there's something prompting that discount. And, with Tevin Jenkins, something made the market get really sour on him. Now, sometimes it could be stupid reasons. That happens every once in a while. It's rare, but it does happen that everybody just gets stupid about something. And that's why you get the heavy discount. But there's usually a reason, right? Great deals don't just fall on your table in the NFL for free, right? And with Tevin, I think the obvious thing to point to is maybe there's more medical things there with that back than what we know. And it made teams, especially teams that were considering plugging him in as a starter, say hell no to that proposition, which then made Tevin Jenkins' market back up. And Cleveland was the best place for him at that point because there's a chance he could play tackle if DeJuan Jones does not play well in preseason. So I think that's why Tevin's here. But that's something to keep in mind, right? Whenever you feel like your team gets an incredible deal, don't just be so gung-ho to think that everybody else is stupid and that's why you got that deal, right? That's where you make mistakes, is when you start assuming everybody's just going to do stuff because they're stupid. That's where you make mistakes. Always assume that there is a reason why you got this deal, that somebody knows what they're doing. Because once you start assuming everybody's dumb, that's where you start to get into a lane where you start to be, kind of off, right? Like, yeah, that's just kind of how I try to operate. So, yeah, I think Tevin Jenkins, probably a discount because he probably had medical or more medical than we know. That doesn't mean that he can't be useful for this team. Maybe the medical stuff just doesn't pop up this year. They roll the dice and they win with it. But, if it does, I'm not going to be surprised. It seemed like it was part of the gamble that they were okay with bringing Tevin in at that money. So, I think that's what went in with it. All right. The next one comes from Danelles, who says, "Hey, Q, love the videos. Think we can all agree that the Browns' defense is pretty solid. However, what do you think of the minimum amount of production for this Browns offense to be considered successful? Also, what do you think the bare minimum is for the offense to get the Browns to a 500 record?" I don't know if there's a statistical minimum for the Cleveland Browns offense to have to reach, right? I don't like giving out numbers like that, like quotas that are going to guarantee that the Browns offense is successful, because there's a lot of different ways you can hit different numbers in the NFL and still have a very unimpressive result. You could throw for a bunch of yards, but if you turn the ball over a ton, it don't really matter how many yards you're throwing for. Or you could score a lot of touchdowns and not get a ton of yards, and people can be like, oh, this offense isn't very productive. They're not getting a ton of yards, but they're scoring a lot, so what does it matter? I think if you want to see what this offense can do to better accelerate the strength of the defense, it's cutting down turnovers, it's making field goals, and it's scoring points in general, but making field goals is a huge part of it, right? Less empty possessions, better time of possession, lowering the possessions that the defense has to play through. So, less 3 and outs, more time of possession, less turnovers, more points. I know that sounds super basic, but that's really it. Those are the metrics that you can use. If the Browns aren't in the middle of the pack in turnovers, if they're 20 and above in points scored, and they're also in the middle of the pack when it comes to time of possession, then I think the Browns will be pretty solid. But if they can't reach those numbers or those thresholds, then yeah, it's going to be a problem for this team, because that's what's going to kill this defensive strength that they have, is turnovers, extra possessions, and empty possessions. That's what breaks the back of defenses. So when you're trying to play defensive-oriented football, got to have reliable field goal kicking, got to have good run game so you can extend time of possession, got to be able to get first downs, and you got to take care of the football. And that's how you can win with a good defense. But thank you for the question, Dan. All right. Kilo with the long question here. Hey, Q, question about the quarterbacks. If or when the Browns draft the quarterback next year, what will the role of Dylan Gabriel and Sanders be? It's pretty obvious that Flacco isn't a factor beyond midseason. I would agree with that. I don't think anyone actually views Kenny as a long-term or intermediate option. I will add this caveat. I think there are some people in the Browns organization who are hopeful that Kenny Pickett can be an intermediate option. But if you're asking me, do I believe Kenny Pickett can be an intermediate option? I have very little faith in that. Do you think it's possible that the Browns intend to use Dylan Gabriel or Sanders as a bridge option while developing their first-round rookie quarterback in 2026? Which one do you think will serve as that bridge? And what will the fate of the other one be? And lastly, do you think that Gabriel and Sanders will deter the Browns from acquiring a veteran quarterback in free agency to assist with the quarterback room's development? A lot of questions here. I'm going to try to get to every single question posed here by you, Kilo. All right, so the first question is, do to use Gabriel or Sanders as a bridge option while developing their first-round quarterback. I think that is a scenario, right? If one of these quarterbacks are successful enough that they can be a bridge quarterback for whatever you draft in 2026 or 27, if that is the case, I think the Browns are absolutely fine with that, right? If you luck out and Shador's a starting quarterback or Dylan's a starting quarterback, but then you say to yourself, I think this guy can be an all-pro in the draft, so you take that guy in the draft, you're still going to start Dylan or Shador while you get that guy ready, but now you got time to develop that guy and make sure that guy's ready. I think that is one of the ideal scenarios, right? I think there's a hope that Kenny Pickett could be the starter. Again, I don't think that's going to be the case. But if Kenny Pickett could be a bridge guy for like 2-3 years and serve that same role, then yeah, I think they would want that. They want something like what Kansas City had with Pat Mahomes. Like if one of these guys can be the Alex Smith to whatever eventually becomes the Browns' Pat Mahomes, then yeah, they would take that. They would take that 10 times out of 10. Now, is that what they're planning on? I think that's so many things have to go right that you can't reasonably plan on going right, that it'd be foolish for that to be a plan. But if it happens like that, I think the Browns will roll with it in a similar way. Kenny Pickett. All right, what's the next question on this question? If they do use the rookie quarterbacks in that role in 2026, which one do you think will serve as that bridge? I don't know, man. It could be Shador. It could be Dylan. I think Shador probably has a better argument. In my opinion, he's a better prospect to me than Dylan because I think he just has a better skill set for this offense and doesn't have the giant hurdle of being undersized in the same way that Dylan is undersized. Which is going to cause problems in a pocket-based system like the Cleveland Browns, right? Pocket and timing, you got to be able to find your windows quick. It's possible, it's doable, but it's very, very difficult, especially at 5'11 flat. So, 5'11 and 1/8 inch. So, yeah, I think Shador is more likely, but again, I'm not going to sit here and say it's guaranteed that Shador is able to do that and be that for the Cleveland Browns. But I think there's a hope there that could be the case. And it make Browns fans nervous because, boy, if it looks like we got a quarterback and then we're trading that quarterback to give a guy that we gave a chance to more opportunity, it's going to feel a lot like Deshaun Watson to some people. And I expect there's going to be a lot of pushback if that happens and it's not successful. Lastly, do you think the Browns having Dylan or Shador will deter them from acquiring a veteran quarterback in free agency to assess the quarterback room's development? That's a good question. I think the Browns truly believe that that's the quarterback coach's job, is to be able to be that veteran in the locker room. There are different philosophies on this, right? Some people think that you need an active player to be in a role like that, because there are just things you can demonstrate as an active player that you can as a coach. I tend to be on that side. But I think the Browns, they might, because they're trying to save as much money at quarterback as possible, decide to forego the veteran quarterback thing if they feel like they can forego it because they want to be as cheap as possible in that quarterback room. But, yeah, that'd be interesting to see. Chili Dog says, do you think Jim Schwarz will ever get the itch to become a head coach again, or can we count on him to be the long-term defensive coordinator and work with the offensive head coach similar to Steve Spagnuolo and Andy Reid? Yeah, I don't even think it's really one, given what Jim Schwarz has been through medically, right, to get back to being a defensive coordinator. I don't know how much of a desire there is from him and his family for him to become a head coach. Like, it's a lot of stress, a lot more hours than being a coordinator. So there's that to consider. Also, I just don't think the appetite's going to be there from the NFL to want to hire Jim Schwarz as a head coach. Maybe if, like, the Browns win a Super Bowl and it's obvious that it was Jim Schwartz's defense that did it, maybe somebody hires him then. But I don't know what the appetite's going to be there. And even in that scenario, it might just be the case that all the credit goes to Myles Garrett, right? Like, it might be one of them situations, right? Like an Eric Bieniemy but defense situation where it's like, well, Eric Bieniemy didn't get much credit for the offense because, in part, Pat Mahomes was the guy executing the offense. And it's like, well, Pat's amazing, right? There are arguments, whether that's a good argument or not, for Eric Bieniemy, and I don't think it's a great one. But I think that will keep Jim Schwarz from really getting that much interest from other NFL teams. And again, I don't know if Jim Schwarz wants to be a head coach again. It doesn't seem like he has much of a desire to be a head coach again. It's a lot of energy, right? So yeah, I think there's a good chance he could be our defensive coordinator as long as we maintain stability on the head coaching side of it, right? Staples Clive says this. It sounds like Dylan Gabriel might become our long-term QB2. If that ends up being the case, would that be worth the 97th pick? I feel the same way about backup quarterbacks that I feel about kickers. I get where people will go online and shout out to Jack Duffin because I've seen him make the argument or something similar, right? And look, Jack's excellent. I have Jack on the show. I got to have Jack on the show again. Don't think there's any beef with me and Jack on this. But for me, I think there's a difference of opinion here because a backup quarterback to me, I just don't think is worth a draft pick. The reason I don't think is worth a backup quarterback is worth a draft pick isn't because the position is valueless. No, I know people tend to make that mistake, tend to make that interpretation when I say stuff like this, but let me clear it up. It's not because I don't think the backup quarterback position is valueless. It's that I think drafting that position is pretty fruitless, and tends to be fruitless. One, quarterbacks develop slowly, especially guys who are going to be career backups. They tend to develop slowly. So if you draft somebody like a Case Keenum, or he was undrafted, right? And he does become a career backup, it's more than likely he becomes a career backup with his second team, right? In the same way, I don't like drafting kickers because, yeah, it's possible you draft somebody who sticks somewhere and becomes a good kicker eventually in the league, but the odds are it's going to be with his second or third team. The truth is, with a backup quarterback, the team that guy's going to be a useful backup quarterback to is probably not going to be his first team. DTR is a good example, right? He's probably going to be a backup quarterback for somebody for a while. It ain't going to be the one it's not going to be for the Browns, though, who drafted him. That's how I feel about drafting backup quarterbacks. I think it's a waste of time. You draft somebody, you don't draft backup quarterbacks, you sign them on cheap deals in free agency. You know, you could take a fly, like Kenny Pickett, taking a flyer on Kenny Pickett. I think that's a good idea to get a career backup, you know, for your team on the cheap. But drafting a dude in the third round to be a backup quarterback, to me, it's not that different from drafting a kicker. The only difference is there is legitimate hope when you draft somebody in the third round that guy can evolve from being a backup quarterback to a starting quarterback, which then it is worth it, right? So there is an outcome that makes it undoubtedly worth it that isn't like super rare. Well, pretty rare, but not super rare in the case of like drafting a kicker and having him be your kicker for 20 years, which has happened like twice in 20 years. You know, so it's similar to drafting a kicker to me. It's not as bad, but it's similar to drafting a kicker to me, which is why I wasn't a fan of the pick, because I'm like, I see the guy as a career backup and you drafted him in the third round. It's like you took a kicker, you know, but we'll see. Hopefully I'm wrong on that and he's much better than a career backup. We'll see. Big Bird says, looking at the tight end options, do you think David Njoku will be extended this offseason? If he has, will that hurt Fannon's chances as a tight end if Njoku signs another 3 years? Or since Fannon would be able to still be around 23, 24 by the time that, I agree with the end of this. I don't think a David Njoku extension changes stuff for Fannon. I don't think it does. One, they're going to bring him along slowly. Tight end development is not rapid, right? And I think having David Njoku is going to be really critical for Fannon because he's super young. He's coming from the MAC, which isn't a great FBS conference, if we're being honest about it, right? And it's going to probably take Fannon a couple of years to really be a starting tight end for a football team. So bring him along, have David Njoku there. And then he's 23, 24 by the time David Njoku's contract extension would be up. Okay, then roll with them, right? Like, you know, well, I don't really see what you're missing there. So, yeah, I don't think it's going to really affect anything. I think I'd be in favor of it. Luke says, do you think Joe Tryon Shoyinka could be like an Ethan Posick kind of situation? The Browns brought in Poe for 1 year, and then they ended up extending him for 3 more years. Could Joe be in that same spot? Yeah. The only caveat I would add here is that the Browns do have significantly more draft capital than they did during the Ethan Posick stuff, right? That was like in the middle of this Deshaun Watson thing where we were pretty low on draft capital. The Browns have a significant amount of draft capital going forward, which means they could just draft somebody in the 3rd round they think who can replace Joe Tryon-Shoyinka's role, which wasn't really the case where the Browns didn't have that much flexibility, right? Like their 3rd round picks oftentimes during that Deshaun Watson trade drought was their first pick in the draft. So it was like much more critical about what roles they addressed with that pick, where now it's like, okay, you can address a role player in the 3rd round, right? Where maybe a couple years ago that wouldn't have been feasible. So that's the thing that changes it, right? Is the Browns are in a spot to where they really want to. They don't have to extend him if he's good. They can just draft somebody to fulfill that role. Dontel says, do you think Deshaun Watson's contract was one of the reasons not to sign Nick Chubb? No, I don't think it had anything to do with it. There's a lot of things you can blame on Deshaun Watson. This is not one of them, okay? His contract had nothing to do with it. The Browns didn't want to bring back Nick Chubb for the money. They just decided they didn't want to do it. And we'll see if they were right on this, right? I think they don't think he's good anymore. They saw what he did coming off that ACL. They saw what he looked like. They got their guys that they feel like they're comfortable replacing him with, and they feel like they're comfortable with the room. I'm not as comfortable with the room. I would have preferred bringing back Nick Chubb, but I think that's where the Browns are. So I don't think really there was much after that trade that happened with Travis Hunter, right? Like the second they got that trade and they got that extra 2nd round pick and they knew they were going to be able to get Quincy Jenkins with that 2nd round pick, that was when I think all of this was over for Nick Chubb in Cleveland. Right before that, when there was more uncertainty about what they were going to take in the 2nd round, I think there was a chance that they would bring back Nick Chubb. But after they got that extra 2nd, it was over with. It was a wrap for Nick Chubb. But that's just my 2 cents on it. Y'all let me know if you think I'm right on that. But I don't think there was anything that could have stopped it outside of that. Deshaun Watson's contract or not, I don't think this was a money decision as much as it was a decision about where they want to go going forward. And they wanted to get a fresh start at running back, which I can understand, right? I think you could do both at the same time, though. Brandon says, so with the Browns transitioning back to their offensive philosophy, do you think that there will be any noticeable difference between how Tommy Reese runs the offense and how Alex Van Pelt runs the offense? This is a fascinating question. This is a fascinating question here, right? Because yes, the Browns are, this is a great question, Brandon, by the way. The Browns are going back to that 2021 style offense, but they're not doing it with, Kevin's right-hand man and Alex Van Pelt. So how is this going to look different, right? Like, I think we're all expecting to see some things that were familiar, and they will do those things. But how is this different? What is the impact of the offensive coordinator under Kevin Stefanski, truly, right? That's what we're trying to figure out. If Kevin's going back to his thing, how much of an impact is Tommy Reese going to have? Where are we going to see Tommy Reese's impact being? I don't have the answer to that question because Tommy Reese does not have enough experience as an offensive coordinator for me to know what his offense is. At this point, he's pretty malleable, so he could change up his whole offensive philosophy because he's under Kevin Stefanski and just looks very strict to Kevin's system. It could look a lot like what he did at Alabama. I doubt it, but it could. That's what's fascinating about this season. We're really going to find that out. And I think that's a great question and something to keep track of during the rest of the year. But that's it for the questions for Q&A. You guys have a wonderful day, an even better night. Peace.